Thank you everyone for coming out. We're just going to take a second as we kind of virtually file in. I'm Gracie. I'm the events coordinator for print. A few things just before we get started. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, which is on the bottom right, or in the question and answer function, which is on the bottom bar of the screen. If you'd like a copy of any of tonight's books, I can include the link to the print page in the chat box. You can click right on through. And now for our speakers. Christopher Golden is the New York Times best-selling and Bram Stoker award-winning author of Ararat, Snowblind, Dead Ringers, and of Saints and Shadows, among many other novels. Golden is also the editor of such anthologies as Seize the Night, The New Dead, and Dark Cities, and the co-host of the popular podcast, Three Guys with Beards. He lives in Massachusetts. Jennifer McMahon is the author of 9 novels, including the New York Times bestsellers Promise Not to Tell and The Winter People. She lives in Vermont with her partner, Drea, and their daughter, Zella. So please join me in virtually welcoming tonight's authors.
Yay! Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, Chris.
This is just so fun. Before we went live, I was saying how it's just so weird because the last 2 years in a row, we would have seen one another up at the Trapp Family Lodge in Vermont on a writer's retreat that we've done the last 2 years in a row. And it just seems wrong. We should be there should be a roaring fire and drinks and a piano player and all that kind of stuff.
Hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate. The
Hot
amazing.
chocolate.
They have amazing hot chocolate, don't they?
Oh, they do. The hot chocolate. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
I miss that. I miss the camaraderie and just.
Yeah.
We all did such great writing there, and the sharing of the writing that would happen at the end of the day, and I miss that.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's also though just a little, it's a little weird because I feel like, and for those of you who haven't been there, the Trapp Family Lodge was founded by the Von Trapp family from Sound of Music, the real family. And the last 2 years in a row, we've gone up and we've done this retreat. And I have to say, at this time of year, that place is both. And I think the reason it was in my brain was not just because I've missed seeing you, but also because I think that like so many of the things we want to talk about tonight, it's both incredibly beautiful. It's got lights, the holiday lights outside the place, all the white lights outside. It's always covered in snow. And at night, it's just gorgeous, but also eerie. I don't know if I would say creepy, but there is that sort of dark, magical aura that anything could happen.
Yeah, there is. I mean, you're in the mountains. It's the landscape itself. You're sort of surrounded by the mountains. And when we go, there's so much snow outside, so there's that too, that adds to it. This sense of to get there, you have to go up the mountain road. So you're driving up this sort of road with switchbacks. It's a little treacherous. You really should have your snow tires, and you get up there. And once you're there, you're there. You don't want to leave the mountain.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to. We went up one time, and this is way off target, but we went up one time, and when our kids were still little, and we had the minivan, and I was following the GPS, and it was really dark, and it was in the middle of a snowstorm. So in the middle of a snowstorm, I'm following the GPS and not paying that much attention because it's the storm, and the GPS took us up. There's a back road, like the service road that goes up there.
Ooh.
And that road hadn't really been cleared properly. So we got maybe a third of the way up the road and got stuck. And to the point where literally every time if I put it in drive and tried to I'd rock a little bit back and then try to go forward, the van literally started to just slide back down the road. No matter what I was doing, it was sliding backwards. And there's a drop off on either side. And I thought, the only thing that I care about right now is not ending up in a ditch or flipping the van with the kids inside and the whole thing. So I very carefully did a 9-point turn to turn us around so that we could slide face first down to the bottom of the hill instead. And I'm telling that story just because I wanted to relate it, but also it's just it's crazy that I've never written anything creepy set there or used it as a setting or even changed the name or whatever. So, but you live in Vermont, so talk a little bit about so you're not from Vermont, but talk a little bit about your like New England background and living in Vermont, and how you feel like in some ways that connects you to your spooky inspirations.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Connecticut. I grew up in suburban Connecticut. I grew up in Avon, which is just west of Hartford, which is not Vermont. And I came to Vermont in the late 80s to go to college and never really left. I kept trying to leave. I moved to Portland, Oregon for a year. I kind of bounced here and there, but I always ended up coming back to Vermont because it felt like home. That said, any native Vermonter will tell me that I am not a Vermonter, even though I've been here on and off since the late 80s. They will tell me that I am a Flatlander. So I've got this sort of outsider status, I think. Even though it's still New England, it's different. It's Vermont. And I think having not grown up here and not being from here, it gives me, I see things that maybe someone who would have grown up here wouldn't necessarily see and notice. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? So there's that. And I'm trying to think, all of my books at least partially take place in Vermont, if not completely take place in Vermont. I keep trying to write books with other settings, but Vermont is just so much a part of me and who I am. And it's just kind of in my blood at this point. And I keep trying to set books in other places and it just hasn't happened yet. So all my books are set in Vermont and I'm not done yet. You know, Vermont's still got so much more to offer. And I like writing creepy books and I think that it works to set them in Vermont. And one of the things I love about Vermont is taking this like, and New England in general is taking this like quintessential New England setting, like the cute little Norman Rockwell scene and the happy little village and just turning it upside down. And I know that you do that too, so.
But do you think like, what is that? And I'm totally like springing this on you, but what is that like weird dichotomy that we all feel about the beauty and unsettling quality that, you know what I mean? Like, don't you think that that's a seesaw that or maybe it's not, maybe it's just two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah, maybe it is. I mean, I think a lot of people don't, you know, a lot of people just see the beauty, and it's certainly sold as like a tourist thing, like come to Vermont or come to New England and see the foliage and see this and drink apple cider and go skiing. But there is a kind of dark underbelly to it for sure. And I think one of the things that excites me is sort of peeling back the layers and making things seem like all happy and beautiful at first, and then peeling back the layers and showing what could be hiding underneath.
And I think, you know, it's weird because, you know, we talked about, I think, a little bit about how like you have this, you know, you have that small town feel and the secrecy of small towns and the intimate knowledge that everybody has despite everybody trying to keep secrets in small towns. And you have the beauty of it in rural areas and the suburbs and all that stuff. But I still, maybe it's, and again, like, you know, New England compared to Europe is a newborn, right?
Yeah.
Know that. And yet, maybe it's just the age of New England and what we think about when we think of the early settlers of New England and the secrets that they kept and the things that they had to do or did, you know, because to me, I always think about it like, you know, you're always sort of peeling back the superficial elements of what the town looks like. And yeah, people support one another and they're there for one another when, you know, when the chips are down. But I always feel like there's something sort of bubbling under the surface.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, like not even necessarily real something, but in my imagination, I always feel like, you know, and again, that comes from a lot of the things I read as a kid, but I don't know, more so than, you know, certainly like Ray Bradbury wrote some great stories about the Midwest and, you know, all of that. But for some reason, I just feel, and maybe it's the cemeteries. You know, we have the greatest cemeteries.
Yeah, but I think you hit on something there when you were when you sort of alluded to the history. You know, we've got this dark history. Bad things happened here. I mean, going way back to the earliest colonists and the things that were done to the Native Americans, and we've got the Salem witch trials, and we've got the vampire craze that happened. There's just so much. There's so much dark history, and
every house is haunted.
Every house is haunted, and how could it not be? I don't know, because it's old. And you know what else I honestly think it is we have such long winters. It's dark for half the year. That breeds, like, what else is there to do but sit around and, well, back then and now to some extent, sit around and tell scary stories. And just, it's it's an inhospitable landscape. Imagine the, like, earliest settlers being here and trying to survive a New England winter without central heat and snow tires and down coats.
Right. Well, and that's it. Like, when I close my eyes and I picture it, and why I feel that way, it's like when it's cold like that, and you're once upon a time, it was so dark outside in these long winters, and people had to huddle around whatever their heat and light source might have been. And so, of course, the stories about what's just beyond the edge of the light would be haunting you, But even in the summertime, I think, and fall is such a great time. I don't know, like, anyway, we're talking generally about stuff, but I wanted to also, because hopefully we'll get some questions as we go, but I wanted to ask you to tell me about, because I love your books, as you know. And I want you to tell me about The Drowning Kind, which is coming up in a few months. And so I was curious if you were working on it when we were up at the Trap last January.
Ah, okay. I was thinking about that, and I think I was working on it a little bit. It was with my editor mostly the last January, but the year before, I had been working on it hardcore. And I remember sitting down and writing some of the early scenes and getting myself nice and scared in that scary setting. So The Drowning Kind will be out in April. It is going to be my 10th book. How did that happen? That's kind of mind-blowing to me. And it's about a woman named Jackie who returns to her old family home when she learns that her sister has mysteriously drowned in the family swimming pool. And she goes back and she's very distraught and devastated, and she starts going through her sister's things and trying to kind of make sense of what happened and trying to piece together what her sister was up to in the last weeks and months of her life. And she realizes that her sister was looking into the history of their family, and not just the history of their family, but the history of the place, the history of the old house, and the history of the spring-fed swimming pool in the backyard. It was long rumored to be able to heal the sick and maybe even grant wishes. But kind of as she dives deeper into it, she realizes that you have to be careful what you wish for. Dun, dun, dun. So that's a little about it. It's set in Vermont, and it's set in Vermont in the present day. And then I go back, and there's a storyline that takes place in 1929 in the early 30s. So I had a lot of fun with it, and it's nice and creepy, and it's got some good creepy scenes in it. I had a lot of fun with it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like, I've written books that take place in all kinds of places all over the world.
Yeah.
But I feel like the ones that are most from the heart for me, and the ones that get to me, are the ones that take place here. Yeah. The ones that take place in New England.
Well, I have to say how much I absolutely love Red Hand so much. And one of the things that got me is I was hooked in right away, because you begin the book with this scene of the 4th of July parade in the small town of Jericho Falls. Jericho Falls, New Hampshire, is that the name of it? Yes. Falls, yeah. So Jericho Falls. So, and you've got the main character, and she's watching this parade, and it just brought me right there, brought me back to every small town 4th of July parade that I've ever been to, and you got it, you nailed it. And then from this familiar, comforting landscape of the 4th of July parade, where friends and family and neighbors are all there, you just take it and turn everything on its head, and it just blows up and turns upside down, and from then on, it's a wild ride. So can you talk a little bit, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is amazing, this is amazing. But what made you choose to set this in a small New England town versus anywhere else in the world?
Well, all the stuff we were just talking about.
Yeah.
The previous 2 books featuring Ben Walker, because again, this is the 3rd book with Ben Walker, but you don't have to have read the other books to read, you can read them on their own. The previous 2 books were sort of international, sort of, political intrigue, all that kind of stuff. And I really wanted to bring Walker home and do something different and more intimate with him. Mm-hmm. and so that's what I wanted to do it. And then it was trying to think about when I imagined, it really was that scene that you just described, that I was like, okay, I know this is my opening scene. And what I was going for, and it doesn't have to be New Hampshire, that those kinds of parades are all over the country. But weirdly, in the back of my mind, it's a scene that feels a lot like a lot of the town scenes in Jaws. You know, and also I've experienced those parades my whole life, just like you know, and I used the phrase not too long ago, rusty nostalgia, to refer to these things, because, you know, in the 70s when Jaws was made, you know, all of those cars in a parade that would have taken place then would have been new, and the veterans who were marching in the parade would have been relatively young and hale, and the fire engines would be sparkling. Now it sort of feels rusty, you know what I mean? It's sort of like it's a relic of another era, and it all is sort of run down. It's like if you go to a town you went to 30 years ago and it was beautiful, and now you go back and there's a lot of graffiti and there's a lot of, there's grass growing up in the cracks in the pavement and whatever. That's kind of like what it feels like, I think, to go to those parades in 2021. Yeah. You know, or if you could go to those parades now. So that was kind of my image, was that. And I thought to myself, like, where do I want that to be? And it was really important to me that it would be New England. And then I needed it to be in the mountains. And I was like, okay, there's something about, I love New Hampshire. I spend a lot of time there. I only live a few miles from the border. But there's something about parts of New Hampshire. There's a lot of like little amusement parks that are really run down, very much rusty nostalgia in and of themselves. Yeah. You know, Clark's Trading Post and
the Bears,
Storyland and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I wanted that feeling, and so that's why I ended up with New Hampshire specifically. You know, yeah.
Yeah, and I love, you almost made the mountain itself a character. I felt like you really brought the mountain to life.
I think if you live there, you know, I mean, that's right. I mean, if you live there, it's your backyard, it's your place, and you have that intimacy, so you know where to run.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And that was one of the awesome parts, is like, that's where Maeve goes, and she, you know, it's almost like running home. You know, she runs to a place that she knows. She runs to a place where she feels safe, and she feels safe on the mountain, and she's there and she knows it. And she knows it in a way that the outsiders don't. You know, she knows all the sneaky back trails and the old snowshoe trail and places that, you know, she knows how to get from one place to another in a way that someone coming from far away wouldn't.
They won't.
Yeah.
She knows where to hide.
She knows where all the hiding places. Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Framingham, Massachusetts, and no mountain anywhere near me, but I did have the good fortune to live on a street where at the top of my street, there was a state forest, or state park, I should say, but it was all woods. And so, you know, my brother and I and our friends knew those woods like the back of our hands. You know, I mean, we knew where every trail led. And except the one time we got really lost, and on purpose, like we just decided we're just going to walk, and we eventually were in like the next town, and we finally emerged, like, I'm going to say a good 8 miles from home, like
wow.
from out of the woods.
That's
and I wrote about that in another book of mine too, but I was going to say, so we talked also about, like, I guess we touched on this, and I wanted to get your take on, I said to you before that, like, for me, New England set horror works best when I feel like it plays on this balance between isolation and community, right? Yeah. So you rely on the community, but the horror stuff is all about that sort of isolation within the community. So it's like, the protagonist is usually sort of made the mistake of tipping, you know, too far in one direction or the other. You know, so I wonder, like, any thoughts about, like, why does that feel menacing? Aside from what we talked about with like, you know, the winter and all that stuff, is there something about like a small community that it is in itself something we can tap into to make it feel menacing? Like King does it all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it is scary to be like on your own in the woods, and that's its own kind of terror. But I think it's just as much of a scary thing to be like in a new town that's completely, what's the word I'm looking for? A kind of close-knit town full of secrets where you're not going to be accepted, where you are going to be an outsider. That's unsettling in its own way and scary in its own way. Why is it scary? Because we all want to belong, right? Like
well, it's like you're a
primal
Flatlander.
thing. You need your pack to help you survive. And if you're going to be shunned and out on your own, it's scary.
I feel like there are so many like classic, Hammer horror movies like Made in England that are similar to this, that have that same thing. It's like you're this outsider. But I was gonna say, so you're a Flatlander in Vermont, yeah. Even though you've been there off and on for 40 years almost. Yeah. And a lot of the people who consider you a Flatlander haven't even been alive that long.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I always will be, but I don't have the connection. My family does not go back generations. My family hasn't been farming here for generations. I don't have the perspective that they do. I don't have the connection to the place and to the community. And I don't know all the ins and outs and what happened with this family and this family back 2 generations ago that's still going on today.
It's funny when my wife and I first moved to Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is where I live. Haverhill is sort of cut in half by the Merrimack River, and one side is Bradford and the other side is Haverhill. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's all Haverhill, but yeah. And it took us years to understand the sort of simmering animosity that the people on the west side of the river had toward the people on the east side of the river, because once upon a time that the managers and owners of the factories on the west side of the river lived on the east side of the river. So it was the workers versus the managers, and and it's like, but those factories have been closed for generations.
Yeah.
But it still lingers,
Yeah, that's so interesting to me that like towns and places hold memories like that, and things keep going and are perpetuated. And you ask someone now and they don't even know the reason why it is the way it is. It's just the way it is.
Right. Like, why is that? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It just is.
Because those people are this way.
Yeah.
What do you mean those people? Most of the people who live there didn't come from here, or they,
Yeah.
It is really interesting.
Yeah. It is interesting. And and I also think about the whole outsider thing in terms of, people in a small town might be apprehensive because sometimes outsiders do come to a small town and want to change things. And a lot of people don't like change, Someone a Flatlander can come to a little town in Vermont and start complaining about the way the farm down the road smells and trying to do something about it, or posting land and saying you can't hunt on this land that generations of families have hunted on, or wanting to legalize marijuana. It's there are people, the outsiders come and sometimes want change, and change is hard. And
they want to leave. We've been smoking it illegally for generations. We don't need it to be legal. That's what they're Come on, you're going to tell me Vermonters don't smoke a lot of marijuana? Please.
Oh, I'm certainly not going to tell you that.
There's also this thing about the person, this horror trope about the person returning home from their, they've been away. So as opposed to what you're talking about, the outsider, it's almost this weird thing about the person who's kind of become the outsider. Mm-hmm. So you grew up in this area and you moved away and things changed in your absence, mm-hmm. or you've changed and it's all sort of stayed the same. And it's not just horror that has this trope, but it became such a trope in the 80s, especially in horror, with like you know, gone off to become a successful lawyer, and now your parents have died and you've returned home to, you know, sell off the family home or whatever. And that, I mean, we've seen this movie and read this book dozens of times. And do you have any thoughts about like why that is such a powerful trope?
Oh, I think it's universal. You know, I think it's something that every single person can relate to, right? We grow up wherever we grow up, and we go away and change, and inevitably we come home and we see our old home with new eyes. Maybe it's changed a little. We've definitely changed. So I think it's something that we all, you know, I think it's something everyone can relate to, for
It's
sure.
also, I think, part of like, as we get older,
Yeah.
regardless of what it is, we discover things, maybe they weren't even secrets, right? I mean, maybe they were just things that everybody knew, but you didn't know because you were younger at the time. So
Yeah.
if you've been gone for a long time and you go home to your family or to your hometown or whatever it is, you learn things that maybe shock you or surprise you in some way. I also think it's really funny that, and I know I said this to you, I think I said this to you once before, but I think it's really funny that horror trope, which is such a, I mean, we could sit here and list probably 100 books off the top of our heads that follow that trope, including fantastic books by well-known authors.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also exactly the same plot as every single Lifetime Christmas movie. If you take, I'm serious, like if you make the magic or supernatural thing into something Christmassy, it's literally the same plot.
Yeah.
It's like, I've gone off to have a successful career in publishing in the city, and I've been gone for years, and now I've come home and, oh no, the bookstore where my favorite cousin worked my whole life, or my best friend from high school who's now passed away is going to go out of business unless I save it, or the
I save it. So in our house, my daughter was very into Hallmark Christmas movies.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Hallmark.
And
yeah.
that, I mean, and so, you know, you've got the romance. So
Yep.
then you've got the old boyfriend from high school who happens to, like, I don't know, own a gingerbread baking, cookie baking company. And I mean, yeah, and inevitably someone spills hot chocolate on someone, and yeah.
But then you have to choose between returning to your adult life or settling back down in your original community and saving, you know, something of that for yourself and for love and all that stuff, which is all very sweet. And again, like my wife Connie likes to have, like, when she's cooking or when she's going to bed at night, she usually will have something on in the background. And from early November until January 1st, she has that stuff running in the back. She doesn't pay attention to most of them.
Yeah,
but
well, you don't need to, right?
It's the
same story, or such a similar story.
But I feel like,
I think there's something comforting about that for some people. You know what's going to happen, and it's like, oh, it's comforting. Nothing terrible is going to happen. No dragons are going to come swooping down and burn up the village. And
but see, I like that. But I think that Shudder needs to have a month every year where they do these horror stories that follow that same formula, like all these books that we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, I don't know. I mean, it is such a great trope. And for some reason, these things do go hand in hand. I don't know. Yeah.
No, and I like what you said. I mean, I think part of it is like uncovering the secrets. I like what you said about the secrets. I think that's true. I think that we see, you know, people go back into the small town and start uncovering the secrets that they might have sort of had a sense were there when they were young and growing up, but now they're really, really catching on. Or secrets that you yourself kept or the character themselves kept, and how that secret has changed them, the character, and the town. And, you know, towns keeping secrets and what secrets are being held there and how it changes the landscape of the town.
Yeah, well, and again, even though it's Midwest, you're talking about that, I think of Freddy Krueger and the story of A Nightmare on Elm Street, how that whole thing hinges on this secret that basically everyone in a certain generation knows this happened.
Yeah.
But they've all kept it secret from the next generation.
And look what happened.
Yeah.
And then that just gave it more and more power.
Yeah. So what, I know there's a whole thing that we talked about, the inspirations that we get from the settings, from the experiences we have as New Englanders.
Mm-hmm.
But what about when it comes to like translating that into the book itself? Like, how do you choose your details? How do you set the mood? What's your process with that?
I see setting as a character. Like, I feel like it's a character in and of itself. And I almost do like a character study, like I do with my characters. I spend a lot of time trying to get to know it. I will write down like the physical description. I'll make maps. Are you a map maker? Do you do maps? You have to do maps. After reading Red Hands, I was making a map in my head as I was reading Red Hands. I was like, I bet you just made a map for this.
Yeah. I think doing Red Hands, I did do, it's more a doodle than a map.
Okay.
But I did scratch out sort of rough locations of where certain things took place, just so I knew north, south, east, and west when I was describing where she went,
Yeah. So I'll make a map, but in addition to like making the map and doing the physical description, I also do character study kind of stuff. Like I'll ask my setting what secrets it's keeping, what its motivation is. What does the setting want in the story? Is the setting holding something back? So I'll do that.
Yeah.
How about you? How do you get into your setting?
It's really weird. I've been doing this a really long time, and I've written a lot of books, and I know, it's funny because I think it was Raymond Chandler, or I can't remember now, who advised against, using weather as part of your introduction to a scene or a story. And I found myself over time feeling it more than designing it. You know what I mean? Like, and I've written several books that hinge completely on winter, and that's a huge part, including the book that I just finished that comes out about a year from now. And they hinge on the cold and the winter and snow and all of that stuff. And in Red Hands, which takes place July 4th, it hinges on the unpredictability of New England weather, on the fact that, like, you open it and in the morning during the parade, it's sunny, but the clouds are rolling in, and it wasn't predicted. It was predicted to be a nice day 2 days ago, but now this morning they woke up and, oh, by the way, there's a big storm coming in, because that happens. Today alone was supposed to be sunny and nice all day, and it turned out to be cloudy and abysmal, like late in the, like after 11 o'clock. So that unpredictability and the way that rain, like a real rainstorm, can feel really oppressive. In a way that snowstorms don't really feel oppressive. They can feel claustrophobic in a way, but like a real rainstorm can really make, and I try to communicate that atmosphere more than, so that I don't want to say that the characters feel it. I want the reader to feel it and just sort of have that carry over. But as far as the setting in general is concerned, for me, it's always about sort of the selection of details, rather than lots of them. I like to try to say, like, in this scene, I want to see a certain number of details that you can hang your mental image on. And I don't know, you want that familiarity. You want somebody to be able to put themselves into it. And part of that too is about the people. It's about the in video gamers would call them the NPCs, the non-player characters, the unimportant sort of background characters that are in a scene, that fulfill the same function as anything else you might see in the scene. But I want you to see those people and to get a sense of where you are because of the people you're seeing. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Like going back to Jaws, again, just like the little kid sitting on the beach towel, eating his hot dog and kind of like humming happily to himself because he's so happy to have a hot dog.
Yeah.
That's such a great detail.
Yeah. No, it is. It
You
absolutely.
know, it doesn't mean anything to the movie, but it's everything to the setting.
No. Yeah. And I was thinking that something you said reminded me that just the idea that I feel like it's important when we're telling kind of fantastical stories, a story that goes someplace like supernatural or otherworldly or just someplace completely implausible. I think it's important to have a setting that will ground the readers, right? You know, to have something familiar, like the familiarity of that 4th of July parade, something that, you know, will leave them grounded, give them solid ground beneath their feet so that we can take off and do this crazy stuff and pull out all the wackadoodle things that we're going to do, and, you know, pull in the scary red hand stuff and pull in the ghosts and what's going on. I think a reader will have an easier time going to those places if they can be back and be grounded on solid ground and familiarity, you know, and it's those little details you were talking about, giving them that sense of familiarity.
But you know, one of the other things, and I feel like this is a cheat when it comes to writing in New England, right? Because I think that the biggest thing in these books as a reader, when I read books like the books that we write, is the moment or the process through which the characters begin to believe in the bizarre or supernatural element. You have to believe that that character believes it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And weirdly, I think it's a little bit easier to make the reader go along with that when you're writing these stories set in New England, because New England has this inherently spooky quality.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because people are like, yeah, I'll go along with that.
Go along with that. It's happening in New England. There's weird stuff in New England. That's
your characters can't do that.
Yeah.
That process for your characters still has to be, their process still has to be like totally reasonable, and you can see how they believe what they now believe. But it's easier to get the reader to go along with that because it's New England, of course.
It's New England, and they know that crazy stuff happens here. And we've got the history. We've got all the creepy stories and the ghost stories, and
right.
Every place is haunted, right?
Right, exactly. Well, that's the thing that makes me laugh too. It's like, so I don't believe in ghosts. I want to. I don't. I want to. And so, like, I know Adam Berry, who hosts, who was on Ghost Hunters for a number of years, and who now has a show. And gosh, the name is slipping out of my brain. But you know, he's one of those guys. He's a ghost hunter guy, and I've talked to him, and he's completely persuasive. And Steven Susko is a screenwriter. Kindred Spirits, thank you. Alma just posted that as the name of the show. And I've known Adam for a long time, and I believe that he believes completely in what he's doing. And I talked to Steven Susko about things that happened to him as a kid in a house that he lived in, that he believes 100% was haunted. And his stories are chilling to hear.
Yeah.
But I've never experienced anything like that, and I want to.
Yeah.
But I never have. And the thing is, like, I just see all these houses, and I'm just like, well, they can't all be haunted. Not every house built before 1900 or before 1940, let's say. Mm-hmm. Not every house in New England built before 1940 can have ghosts in it.
I don't know. Maybe. I think the places hold memories. I do. And I don't know what the difference is between a place holding a memory and a haunting. But
well, all I want to say is that anybody who knows of an actually haunted house or location in New England, as soon as COVID is over, invite me. I want to come. I want to experience it. Because I want to believe in ghosts, but I just don't. But I'm totally open. I'm totally open to it.
Yeah. I am a big believer, and there's more to this life there's more than to things than meets the eye. And yeah,
I've had I don't disagree with that.
Experiences, but nothing. Have I ever seen a ghost? No. I've heard some strange noises. Actually, around Halloween, I went to Emily's Bridge in Stowe, which is not far from the Trapp Family Lodge.
Yeah.
And my daughter and I went, and I've been many times. You go and you make a pilgrimage, and I usually go with teenage girls, and ha ha ha, it's very funny, and they get all freaked out. And this time it was just my daughter Zala and I, and we were there, and we were on our way out, leaving, and we were driving the car, and we stopped the car in the middle of the bridge, and we had the windows down, and my daughter was leaning out taking pictures, and I'm listening, and then we just heard this like tee-hee-hee, this laughter that sounded like it was right behind the car. It scared the hell out of me. And I looked at her and she looked at me, and we were both like, did you hear that? And she said, what did you hear? I heard laughter. Did you hear laughter? And I said, yes. And she wanted to get out and like video and try to get recordings and stuff. And I just got the heck out of the grove. I was scared. I was spooked.
I wish I'd been in the car. See, I need to be in the car because I just,
so we'll go on a field trip there. Next time we're at Trap, we're going to go to Emily's Bridge.
All right.
Ghost hunting, for
absolutely, sure. Absolutely. Oh, here's Gracie, not a ghost.
Not a ghost. Nope. But I do have scary questions. No, they're very normal questions. Alrighty, so I have some audience questions here. And I will start with this one from Sarah. Where is your favorite place to write, apart from the Trap Family Lodge?
Jennifer, do you want to go first?
My favorite place to write, I write at my house now, of course, because here I am. I have a really cool office. Where I love to write is I have like a little garden shed outside in the yard. I can't write there during the winter because it's too dang cold. It doesn't have heat or electricity. But I like being separated from the house. I'm also I love writing in libraries. And I miss that. I want to go back and write in libraries when I can go into libraries to write again. How about you, Chris?
You know, I'm sitting in my office now. I'm surrounded by movie posters and comic book art and books, obviously, and stuff like that, and family pictures and stuff like that. I've done for the last 27 and a half years, I've done almost all my writing in this room, probably like 95% of it. But that doesn't mean it's my favorite place to write. You know, I like to write outside. I've gone to you know, when my daughter was younger, she played soccer. Sometimes I would take her to practice and bring a chair and my laptop and I'd write there. And writing at the Trap is nice. And actually the one place in the world that I've ever been that I thought might actually be haunted, because I'll tell you another time about the dreams that I had while I was there, was I went to Paris to do book signings. And I stayed with my editor. I stayed at a flat that his wife owned in Paris by myself. And writing there was really cool because it was a creepy place. So it was really cool by myself in this, you know, anyway, but yeah, so that was probably my favorite place ever to write. But unfortunately, I could only stay for a few days.
All right, and then this is kind of related to Jennifer's story about the bridge, but from Alma, what is the scariest place? What do you think is the scariest place in New England, either a place you've visited or that you've heard about?
Oh man, scariest place in New England. I don't know, all of Salem freaks me out just because of the history there, thinking about everything that happened. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
If I could travel back in time, the scariest place in New England was this house called the Lavoli Mansion that was in my neighborhood when I was a kid. And it wasn't even a mansion. It was sort of an ordinary sized house, but it had columns in the front. And it was a few streets away from me, and it had been abandoned. And so sort of like in It's a Wonderful Life, where that house is abandoned and they're throwing rocks to break windows, like had a lot of broken windows, the paint was all falling off and stuff. And boy, it just scared the crap out of me when I was a little kid. We would run by it, like in It, when they run by that house, we would run by the house. But as far as like actually scary places, I don't know. I think, you know, there's a place called the Notchland Inn, which is in New Hampshire. And it's one of the only, I feel like it's in Hart's Landing, but it's one of the only inhabited structures in the town, and it's between two mountains. It's in the valley, and if you go outside that place at night, the level of darkness, I mean, it's like you didn't think that the night could ever be that dark, but it is so dark that you feel blind, and it's that's pretty terrifying, actually, because anything could happen.
All right, this one's from Michael. Do you ever write pen and paper as opposed to typing on one of those newfangled computer things? What we're on right now.
I am a big notebook, pen and paper person. Whenever I'm stuck on a story, I put away my computer and I get out my notebook and my pen or my pencil. I'm so old school, I often use a pencil. I have a composition book and a pencil, and I will write my way out using that. So definitely, I do. How about you, Chris? Pen and paper?
I haven't written prose in a notebook or on paper, I don't think, since I was 20.
Oh.
However, I often plot in a notebook.
Interesting.
I often break down. I've done comic book scripting in a notebook.
Yeah.
And I find that plotting in a notebook is much more organic for me because it doesn't feel as permanent. Weirdly, you can delete much easier on the computer, but I feel like I can scratch it out, and there's some satisfaction, that tactile satisfaction of scratching something out and adding something else. Yeah. So I plot a lot on paper, but I can't write prose without a computer. It's like if you're a righty writing lefty, it just feels fundamentally too awkward for me.
Yeah. I often try to get to know my characters by writing longhand. Like I'll ask a question and I'll have them do a response as if they're journaling. And so that helps sometimes.
Is this like auto ghostwriting thing?
I was like, it's kind of like spirit writing, right? In my book, The Winter People, there's a part where there are journal entries from this woman, Sarah, and I got almost all of those just by writing them out longhand. And I couldn't get her voice right when I was typing it. I had to get it out, and I wrote in cursive. So maybe it was kind of spirit writing, and because I don't write in cursive, but I wrote all her journal entries out in cursive in my notebook. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Alrighty. This one is for Chris. You write both horror and mystery novels. Sometimes the two genres are vastly different, but you seem to play jump rope with the line. What do you think the differences are, and how do you play with that line?
It's hard to say. Like, I've actually just started, and I'm hoping to find the time this year to really do it. I've started my first straight up non-supernatural crime novel, whose title I'm not going to share, but it's literally the best title I've ever come up with. And I've written like most of the first chapter, and that's it. And what's interesting about that is that there's no, when you're including the supernatural, you can get into a heightened kind of sense of reality. You get into this heightened reality where certain things no longer matter. And sure, that can be true in a crime story where the danger that you're in, the peril that you're in, makes certain things no longer matter. But I feel like as a longtime reader of crime and mystery fiction, particularly crime fiction, you can't really escape the corners you paint yourself into as easily as you can when you're using the supernatural. Because sure, you can have a gun go off, or somebody rolls a grenade under the door, or something happens in that, but you can't escape what the characters do to one another. You can't write it off. You can't say it was a demon. You can't, so to me, it's always felt like a little scarier as a writer to go and try to write that, because I know the tricks that are involved in writing supernatural stories. I know those escapes, like as a magician, like I know those tricks, but I feel like there are fewer tricks that you can use to get out of the intimacy that's required in the danger in those stories. That may be total nonsense, but that's how I feel about it.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
We have one last question. What is a horror trope that you'd either like to subvert yourself in your writing or see subverted in a form of media?
I mean, so much of horror fiction and horror entertainment from the last dozen to 15 years has been about subverting the tropes, right? Particularly stuff like the final girl trope and all of that. And I don't know. I mean, I sort of feel like we're at the point where I don't know. Are we post trope subversion at this point? It's weird because I feel like I feel like I'll be copying people now. I mean, it's been done so much that I feel like I've been copying people. The one thing that drives me crazy about reading, but particularly about watching horror in entertainment, is that we still have Black and other people of color characters who either die first or who are they're in the character as the spouse or significant other of a white character, or they're only in the story. They're clearly only in the story for that. And obviously Jordan Peele has flipped that around, which I think is great. But I'd like to see it normalized a little bit more, that that maybe it doesn't have to, maybe that what Jordan Peele does won't seem so remarkable anymore. That would be nice. I don't know. And I kind of think that it's time that we, like, Buffy was great for her time, and there's a lot, I mean, I wrote a lot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer novels, and there's lot to be said for it. But I would love to see a lot more people who are doing horror that where being the strong female character isn't about just kicking ass. You know what I mean? That it's about more than just being a woman doing things that previously we'd been more familiar with seeing the men do. And I don't know. What about you, Jennifer?
I totally agree with everything you just said. Yeah, I mean, the strong female character who's not just there to kick ass, but who's there to, like, be a fully developed character and take you on a journey, yeah. And I absolutely agree about people of color and Black people, and come on, it's time. Times are changing, but it's changing. I feel like it's changing a little too slowly. So we all need to do our part and help that change. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, horror, I think horror has been moving on in a really positive, strong way in subverting those tropes. And actually, the other thing I'm going to do is turn this around and say my favorite trope subversion, bar none, in horror, is in a film. It's Tucker and Dale versus Evil, which, if you haven't, Jennifer clearly hasn't seen it. I don't know if you've seen it, Gracie. You seem to. And Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Jennifer, go watch it tonight. Get Drea and Zella and make them watch it with you. My wife and daughter do not like horror movies. They don't like gore. They don't like anything like that at all. And they loved it because it is. It's in the subgenre that I lovingly refer to as the Killbilly movie. But in this version, basically, it's about a bunch of sort of college kids who are going off to go fishing and do things in the mountains. And usually that ends up with them meeting these sort of like inbred hillbilly characters who then murder them and whatever. And this is about a group of those college kids who run into Tucker and Dale, who are actually just like incredibly sweet guys who are best friends in the best way, and who've bought a very scary cabin together in the mountains. And the college kids assume that they are the sort of murderous redneck hillbillies you see in all of those movies. And horrible things come from that assumption. And
Oh,
it's such a great trope subversion that I just think after that movie, you just went, why bother?
nice. Oh, I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah, it's
I will.
terrific.
All righty. Well, thank you for the movie recommendation. And thank you both for being here tonight, chatting with us. We have copies of Chris's new book, and we can pre-order Jennifer's book if you head on over to the website. And thank you everyone for coming out tonight as well.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, Gracie.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you, Jennifer,
Gracie,
and
for
thanks to
being here.
Print.
Yeah.
You know, if you're watching this and you haven't been to Print, definitely go visit and, you know, order from them online. It's a beautiful store and run by great people. And I can't wait until the world is back into a place where I can just go visit all my favorite bookstores again.
You could do like a bookstore crawl just throughout New England.
We were talking about that recently, actually, right? That we want to do exactly that. Like when this is done, I just want to get a caravan of writers to do exactly that, to spend like 4 or 5 days just doing that bookstore crawl.
And we can stop at haunted places on the way too.
Perfect.
We can
Find me a ghost.
and visit bookstores.
All right.
Maybe we'll find a haunted bookstore. That would be pretty awesome.
Perfect.
We do have a ghost at the bookstore. His name is Howie, so you guys can come meet him. He's very
Sounds
cool.
good.
He's a very chill ghost. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, Jeff.
Good night.